With nearly a decade of specialized experience at intersection of equity, compensation, and financial consulting, he has guided numerous organizations through the complexities of equity management. Today, he leverages this deep expertise to highlight the critical legal and financial pitfalls to avoid when designing and scaling equity programs for long-term success. Can we have a huge round of applause for Abhishek?
Thank you. Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I was the last minute addition to this panel because my colleague was stuck, and I changed the topic a bit. If you see the program, it was different. So I am trying to emphasize on the basics and what pitfalls to avoid, right? Most of us are HR leaders. Questions around ESOPs do come to us whether we have a policy or not. In this presentation, I have intended to cover 5 broad topics. What are ESOPs? Phases in ESOP implementation. Key parameters, what one has to think through. So one is, apart from our HR side of things, financial side of things, compliance side of things. What are the pitfalls? That becomes very critical because today, in this 21st century, a lot of startups coming in and the problem statements are different, the objectives are different, right? Earlier it was only retention tool, but today it is being used extensively to drive performances, etc. So pitfalls to avoid, and 5 would be the takeaway. So if I talk about what are ESOPs, right? I mean, there is some sense of comfort and knowledge amongst the population, but I do get questions, are these shares, do they carry voting rights? So the answer is ESOPs are options and not obligation or shares which are granted to the employees, which will vest only and only upon satisfaction of certain conditions. Now these conditions can be time-based, it can be performance-based also. So, it can be individual performances, it can be corporate performances, it can be departmental targets, as our org is structured. Upon vesting of these options, the employee or the option recipient has to exercise his right. So it is not automatically like if someone has worked in the US, you get share awards or RSUs where the shares are credited to your account upon satisfaction of conditions. Here, the employee will have to exercise their right. He has to pay certain monies. So perquisite tax, as a company that we represent, it is our responsibility to collect, and the exercise price. As a company, then the secretarial team which works alongside us will get into allotment of these shares, and post allotment the employee will make benefit or wealth creation will happen when he decides to sell the shares. So that's the actual flow of life cycle of stock options. This is a classic example what is stock options, right? How the value is delivered to the employees. So suppose, just assume the share price of a company is 1400 rupees today when it's the grant date. That's the base price. It goes on to 3000 rupees when the employee decides to exercise. So in the vesting period, the appreciation has been of 1600 rupees. So this 1600 from an employee perspective is the perquisite tax or perquisite value for him, which he has to pay tax upon. So basically, he would pay tax on 1600 bucks basis as maximum marginal rate, 43%, 36%, whatever bracket he falls in. And then if he's in a position to hold on to these shares, then it turns into a capital gain. Suppose the price is 4,000 after 2 years. In case of unlisted companies, he'll pay 12.5% on 1,000 rupees, which is the capital gains for him, which is the ultimate wealth creation from an employee perspective. So what are the phases in ESOP implementation? While it sounds like an easy strategy, there are 5 to 6 steps that are involved. First is the why we are creating this strategy, right? Let's take a step back. It's not only about long-term incentives. Any long-term strategy a company or a business decides to implement, it is driven by the North Star or the goal that we want to achieve with it. So, companies may say, Abhishek, when I speak, we want to ensure retention, there is a lot of attrition. Or they may say, hey, Abhishek, we have turned 25 years old. I need to reward people who have been with me through the journey for 15x number of years. It can be, hey, Abhishek, I want to hire new talent. Market is competitive. If it's a startup, they'll say the people are joining me taking a haircut. So the objective is what will define the structure that we implement. So all the parameters, I have slide on all the critical parameters following, but which instrument, whom to give, what price to offer it at, what should be the vesting schedule becomes very important, which is phase 2. Third is the documentation side of it. So across the globe, equity compensation is something as a topic which is regulated by the local regulations. In US, you have IRS. In India, you have Companies Act and SEBI 21 guidelines to look at it. So we have to ensure a foolproof documentation in terms of scheme document, resolutions, explanatory statement around it. Fourth is these documents have to be approved. So ESOPs, one question that we may be asked is what is the grant date? So as CHROs or HR practitioners, while we want to grant the employee at the time of joining itself in the offer letter, but in India, no grant is formal unless it is approved by the board or shareholders. So does a ESOP commitment in offer letter stands valid? The answer is no. It has to be approved by the board or NRC. Then once, like I mentioned, NRC will grant the options. After the approval, grant happens, and then it is the ongoing compliances. Like I mentioned, this is a regulated subject. So there are compliances in terms of valuations, in terms of disclosure, which our secretarial team will have to undertake. So that's the life cycle of stock options. Now the key parameters. Now typically, you can look at 8 to 9 parameters. It will depend upon the company we are a part of, unlisted, listed, private, public, unlisted, or public listed. But typically, one question is, what are the instruments which are available? Now, typically, when I speak to CHROs who have come from the US or founders who are from the US, the first question is, do you have RSAs and RSUs in India? The answer is no. In India, we only recognize ESOPs or stock options, which can be granted at a discount, but minimum face value has to be collected. So which instrument to choose becomes very important. Do you want a dilutive instrument, non-dilutive instrument? How do you source the equity? Should it be primary shares, secondary shares? Then the second question is, how do I price these options, right? People working in US, Singapore have the habit of getting these free of cost. When they join an Indian company, it is not free. Minimum face value, majority of the companies it is pegged at 10 rupees, but it may be 1 rupee, 2 HDFC, it's 2 rupees, for example. So there is a minimum price the employee has to pay. So what is that price? Now, yeah. So the price is a factor, we have to mathematically build an equation in terms of what should we price these options and how does it impact my accounting charge, because for ESOPs there is a cost associated which hits our P&L. Thirdly, one more point here which is important is, in case you are a listed company or you are an investor-backed company, the investors or the proxy firms may have issues if you decide to grant options at a deep discount. So we have to build the messaging or story in such a way that, boss, the pricing is linked to corporate performance. If we are giving a deep discount, it is linked to corporate performances. Third is, what should be the pool size, right? Typically, should it be a 10% pool? Should it be 1% pool? It depends upon what is our paid up capital, what is our objective behind stock options, right? If you are a startup, you would want to do a broad-based plan. So if you're a bootstrap, you're doing it, your pool 10% would get diluted as in when you raise funds. So what should be the pool size, and what should how do we utilize that pool? So typically my advice to companies is, look at the next 2-3 years of your lateral hires and then create a pool. What should be the eligibility criteria? One is, should I grant it to everyone? So this has a lot to do with what are the industry specifics, right? If you talk about e-commerce tech companies, the penetration is much more higher if you compare it to a manufacturing company. Grant frequency, again, it's objective. If you say, hey, Abhishek, my objective is retaining the talent, my suggestion would be grant every year, so that there's a rollover or overhang of unvested options over the vested options. Quantum estimation, very important, right? Many of us doing interviews would have committed, I'll grant options worth 10 lakh. Now, what is that 10 lakh? Or what is that 30 lakhs? Or what is that 1 crore? How do you estimate it? So we have to look at how do we arrive at a formula to derive. So basis the criticality of the talent, senior leadership, past performances, future expectations, designations, all of these taken into consideration, we have to award a criticality and accordingly decide on the quantum. Vesting period and vesting conditions, again, like I spoke earlier, time-based, performance-based. Performance can be corporate, it can be individual. If you go to the European side of things, it is to do with TSRs, so total shareholders return or relative TSRs. Sorry. In an unlisted company, it is also important how will we provide exit, right? You and I don't know when the company gets listed. I'm sitting on options which does not have an exit opportunity. may become, so this is where it becomes a tissue paper or a very important document from an employee perspective. So what is the exit opportunities in case of unlisted company, or what is the exercise period in case of listed companies? What happens in case of separation? Very critical. Now, the law gives you some directions in case of unfortunate circumstances, death, incapacity. But as a company, as a HR, it is our responsibility to decide what happens for good leavers, bad leavers, vested options, unvested options. What happens in case of retirement also becomes very critical. If you're in a manufacturing sector, typically people are on the verge of retiring whom you reward. So that is something. Direct route or trust route. I mean, typically people do not know what is trust route, right? Trust is only and only an SPV. It does not, there are no pros and cons of a trust. You need a trust if you're looking at secondary shares, or if you're looking to provide, exit to the employees. If you're an unlisted company and an investor wants to buy those shares, these are certain cases where you need a trust. So these are certain decision parameters that one has to decide upon while strategizing long-term incentives. It can be, again, equity settled, cash settled. From there on to actual implementation and exit to the employees. Now, the pitfalls around stock options, right? Many companies implement it like a cookie cutter approach. I've seen companies take, unlisted company taking a scheme document of a listed company and landing in a soup. So typically, I have broadly categorized pitfalls into 4 kinds of pitfalls. The first is structural pitfalls. So what should be my pool size, right? Like I said, evaluate as an HR what is our requirement today and in the coming next 2-3 years. We don't need to create a pool of 10 years because there might be investors, there might be strategic buyouts, there might be an IPO, OFS where people will move out. So don't create a pool that is huge and the incoming investors might have to suffer. So let's create a pool which is suiting our requirement for the next 2 to 3 years in the journey. What to do? Broad-based plan, unlimited coverage plan. It is to do with which industry we are operating in. I mean, ESOP as an instrument should only and only be used to reward people who understand equity, right? I mean, if you talk to a fresher out of a college, he might not value equity the way a seasoned professional would value it. What is the objective? So we have to clearly define the objective. It cannot be, okay, market mein chal raha hai, isliye we have to do it. I always quote this as an example. ESOP culture in India was bought by tech companies, whereas TCS till date does not have an ESOP plan. I mean, whether they are doing it or not, that's a separate story. But till today, if you check, there are no ESOP plans. So objective is very critical. How do I grant? So like I mentioned, if it is to ensure retention of the talent, it has to be a recurring grant. If it is to reward someone from the past association of performance, it can be a one-time grant. Manufacturing companies typically have a cyclic grant linked to the business life cycles. Vesting conditions, again, if you want performance, you can also benchmark or put vesting conditions. Hey, Abhishek, the vesting is 25% each year, subject to we achieving a CAGR of XYZ%. So we have to define those vesting conditions and the performance conditions and be in a position to measure it. So if you say, Abhishek, it will vest basis the TSR, whereas we are not measuring the TSR, it does not make sense. What are the exit opportunities in case of unlisted companies? See, from an employee perspective, one has to realize for me to trust this grant letter that has been issued to me, I need to look at the scheme and I need to be educated in terms of what are the exit opportunities, right? I mean, an unlisted company staying unlisted forever will not give me the monetization that I expect from the stock options. The second is company-specific pitfalls. Coordination. Now, most of the world thinks that this is a HR function, it's a comm side of things, but practically if you see, the HR is involved, the shareholders are involved, the secretarial team is involved, the finance team is involved because there are accounting charges also. So it's every company talking about this needs to form a steering committee to talk on all the, coordinate amongst all the stakeholders in the life cycle of stock options. What should be the exercise period? Like I mentioned, if it's an unlisted company, do you want to link it to a liquidity event, right? For example, Flipkart implemented a plan in 2007. There was no liquidity until Walmart invested 2017. So was there a liquidity event defined? The answer was it was linked to a liquidity event 10 years after, whenever it happens. In case of listed companies, you would want to keep a lesser exercise period because the longer the exercise period, the higher the accounting charge that hits your P&L. Separation clauses. I have seen unlisted companies doing an ESOP scheme copied from a listed company while your exercise period is linked to liquidity event for your current employees. For separated employees, you say you exercise by your last working day. So are we saying that, hey boss, you are leaving the company, You convert the options into shares, come on our cap table and join a competitor. So our separation rules have to be defined basis the conditions that we have put in terms of exercise, liquidity, all of it. Unlisted company, if you allow exercise, there is also possibility of minority shareholding concern, right? Employee becomes comes on the cap table, becomes a shareholder. Now tomorrow, if he moves out of the system, how do you tackle it? I have seen companies going for a strategic listing, SPAC listing. There were few ex-employee shareholders untraceable. It becomes a challenge. So we have to talk on these aspects also while structuring our policy. Compliance pitfalls, so again, like I mentioned, there are regulations in each and every geography. So while as a company, if we are domiciled in India, we have to look at the laws of the land. From an employee perspective, it is important to look at what are the laws in their local geography as far as taxation of stock options are concerned. Eligibility and coverage. So unlike US where you can grant, or Singapore for that matter, you can grant options to anyone. In India, you can only grant options to your permanent employees or employees in case of listed companies. You cannot grant it to consultants or advisors as long as you are unlisted, or unless if you are listed, you can prove exclusivity basis for them. Accounting treatment. Many companies do it, do not take into account what are the accounting charges or what is the provisions under Ind AS or IFRS or guidance note, whatever they follow. So as a HR, when we actually think about this, we have to take accounting team also into consideration while strategizing this. And the last pitfall that I had to speak about is communication pitfalls. So it's a long-term strategy, right? Unlike my pay slip, which comes to me every month, this is something that once granted will have a life of 4 years. So it is important for an organization to regularly communicate. See, you deal with human psychology, right? Employees are nothing but human psychology. So the stronger or the clearer we communicate, if it's a listed company, I still can go to the stock exchange and look at what's the price and do my math. But in case of unlisted company, good habit to have a 6-monthly or a yearly town hall to educate the employees in terms of how we have moved from point A to point B. Takeaways, so like I always say, equity compensation, it's like a 2 feet wide but 1,000 feet deep subject. It has to be tailor-made. It has to be made to suit to the company which is implementing it. And it does not go by the logic of one size fits all. So that's it. I mean, I have some background about Qapita. So Qapita, we are 26, 27 years old into the domain of equity compensation. 21st century, a lot of professionals are stepping into the shoes of ownership, be it as employees, be it as investors, be it as promoters. So at Qapita, we are unlocking the potential of ownership. We help companies with seeding. So basically creating ESOP strategies, creating different types of plan policies around it. We help companies build it, so ongoing administration and maintenance of data. We help company with harnessing the power, so basically compliances. If you're doing a trust route, I act as trustee also. And we also unleashed, so I have a liquidity arm also, so in case unlisted company is looking for liquidity for their options, we can help you there also. So that's about us and that's about equity compensation. Happy to connect after this session if any queries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abhishek, for a wonderful session. I would like to call upon stage Sanket from Geo to felicitate sir.